Eric Smith is the Associate Professor of Rhetoric at York College of Pennsylvania. He is also the co-founder and co-editor of Free Black Thought. In a Newsweek article, Professor Smith wrote, quote, "We hear endlessly about systematic racism, white supremacy, the black-white income gap, and police brutality," unquote. So powerful an ideology has this narrative become, he says, that those of us who pose a counter-narrative, that's black anti-woke writers, for example, frequently find our words being misconstrued in an effort to stanch their impact, unquote. Here's Professor Smith. Professor Eric Smith of York College, what's a professor of rhetoric?
A professor of rhetoric is somebody who teaches persuasion, basically, and everything therein, audience consideration, context, the values and beliefs of an audience or an environment, taking all those things into consideration when speaking or writing. There are various definitions of rhetoric, but I still go by the classic Aristotelian one, which is the ability to, in any given situation, discern the available means of persuasion, which is to say that whether you're in this context or this context, you know how to speak your mind and persuade and inform.
When did you start wanting to be a professor of rhetoric?
I actually went to graduate school to be a professor of American literature, focusing mostly on 19th century nonfiction. Emerson, for example, Frederick Douglass, things like that, even William James to a degree. That didn't last long because I discovered rhetoric in graduate school. I realized that, this thing about persuasion and discourse and how certain ideologies affect how certain people speak. I've been interested in this the whole time. I just didn't realize it existed. So I got my MA in American Lit, but switched to my PhD in rhetoric.
Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Mount Holly, New Jersey. Technically East Hampton, but we share a zip code, and there was nothing in East Hampton at the time, but a few houses and some cows. So I always say Mount Holly. I went to Rancocas Valley Regional High School in Mount Holly. And it's South Jersey, not North Jersey. Those are two very different states.
Explain that.
Well, South Jersey is why they call it the Garden State. North Jersey very much is not. Now, I'm not going to say that, North Jersey is an ugly place. I'm not saying that at all. But I'll put it this way. They're Giants and Jets fans. I'm an Eagles fan.
What was your family like?
My family was wonderful. It was a very lively group of people. The house was a great place to come to and a sad place to leave. All right. So I really enjoyed, and to this day still enjoy, my family. It was a good environment.
How many kids in the family? What did your parents do?
There were 5 kids. There are 5 kids in the family. I'm second to last. My mother was a unit coordinator at the Deborah Heart and Lung Center. And my father was a Vietnam vet turned postal worker. And we were raised lower slash middle class. And, as far as I'm concerned, I had they gave us a lot of opportunities they didn't have. And to this day, I appreciate that. And it's part of some of the stuff that I write. It's part of what motivates me.
What were your interests in high school?
My interest in high school. Wow. I wanted to write. I liked writing. It was an escape for me. It was something that I thought I was good at and that I would continue to do in my future. I had no idea what the word rhetoric meant at the time. Or anything like that. And I didn't really think I'd be an educator, but I knew I wanted to write.
Where'd you go to college? First step.
Ursinus College, a small liberal arts college, about 40 minutes north and slightly west of Philadelphia.
Why did you pick that?
There was a college day at my high school. The cafeteria was filled with all these booths, kiosks, if you will. And I saw the Ursinus one and made a beeline. Just something about it. I know that is not, an answer becoming of a professor that I intuitively found my college, but that is what happened. I looked at it. I felt good from the people talking. My one of the assistant coaches on the football team happened to go there, so that nudged me a little bit as well. So yeah, that's why I chose it.
Did you play sports in either high school or college?
Yes, I played football. I ran track. I did basketball a little bit in high school, and in college I did football,
So after what was your major at Ursinus?
English,
Where'd you get your master's?
University of Illinois, Chicago.
Why did you go there?
Um, well, I wanted to get out of the Philadelphia, New Jersey area for one thing. Chicago is a place I always wanted to visit and check out. I was excited to be in a big city by myself. That's daunting to a lot of people. It wasn't to me. It was adventurous, and a professor at Ursinus, my undergrad at the time, thought I'd like it. And there was a professor there who she knew, and you know how things happen, and I went there. I liked it, and I applied, and I got in.
And what was your focus for your master's degree?
American Lit, yeah.
Do you have
I
a do you have a favorite writer or two?
yes, Emerson and Douglas, Ralph Waldo Emerson and Frederick Douglass were my favorites. But you gotta with a master's degree, you gotta expand a little bit farther than that. But those were the ones. In fact, Emerson's self-reliance was a big motivator when I was in college as my undergrad. It resonated with me, and it led me to read more of his stuff, and it all resonated with me.
What was it? Give me some ideas you got from Emerson that about self-reliance.
Well, he has a wonderful essay titled "Self-Reliance," and what he does, and he goes through life saying, "Here's why we shouldn't have to depend on others too much, right? We shouldn't, read these authors and abide by them just because they have particular ethos, right? We have knowledge ourselves. We should live life, get out of the library and go out and live life." In fact, in the American Scholar essay, he says just that, which Harvard didn't like at the time. He was giving a talk on Harvard about how, college was overrated. He wasn't invited back. So I liked his grit. I liked his moxie. And I liked what he was saying about self-reliance. And I think it's something that unfortunately is starting to wane in society today.
Why Frederick Douglass?
Amazing story. An escaped slave who became the most famous speaker of the 19th century. I could put arguably in front of that, but no. I mean, if you look at the speaking engagements he had, the newspaper articles, he was a demand, right? People wanted to hear how this black slave escaped and became so eloquent. And well, he did it because of self-reliance, hard work, knowing what he wanted to do and going for it, being pragmatic in nature, right? And he admired Emerson for that.
So, how did you immerse yourself in both authors?
How? Well, you just read them for one thing. You dig that deep into what they're talking about, not just their publications, but the history behind their lives and things like that. Um, what's more, they were inspirations. They weren't just writers, who wrote interesting things. They were inspirations for how to, go out into this world and succeed, right? If Frederick Douglass can escape slavery and become the person he was, there's no excuse for me not achieving my goals. You know, what's more, self-reliance is one of my favorite attributes, along with individuality. Two things that Emerson embodied. So yeah.
But as you know, right over here in Anacostia is the Frederick Douglass House.
Hmm.
And then with Emerson, it's up there in Concord, Massachusetts,
Hmm.
right up there on Authors Road. Did you ever go to either place? And they came from vastly different
Yeah,
origins.
I haven't. I haven't gone. Again, I found rhetoric and said I'll do that stuff later. So yeah,
After a master's, where did you get your PhD?
I stuck around. I stayed at University of Illinois Chicago.
And your dissertation was about what?
My dissertation was called A Rhetoric of Mythic Proportions. It talked about how Dionysus and Hermes represented certain kinds of rhetorical theory and practice. And it also talked about mostly Hermes and other trickster figures, Loki, Esu, Elegua. There's a trickster figure in every culture if you go back far enough, and they all represent language, communication, and the nebulous nature of language. How one term can mean so many different things to other people. Language manipulation, persuasion, right? So these were literally gods of rhetoric. So I wanted to dive into that, and that was my dissertation.
How long have you been at York College and what's it like?
It's been 10 years. Exactly. This is the best place I've ever worked regarding, the faculty, the staff, my peers here. I look forward to meetings with them. It's a great place. I'm happy to be here.
Going to switch now to a headline that was actually in one of the newspapers this morning. Harvard is named worst school for free speech, scoring 0 out of a possible 100. Are you aware of this?
No, I am not. What paper is that?
Well, it was published by the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression.
Oh, okay.
And, they say released its annual college free speech rankings today, which dubbed the state of free speech at the Ivy League school abysmal. When you hear that, I'm sure you know Harvard and all that.
Yeah.
Compared to what you're getting at your college, does that surprise you?
It doesn't surprise me. Unfortunately, a lot of the Ivies are having issues with free speech these days. What's more, if Fire is presenting it, there's some sense to it. I believe. I think they do good work. So I don't know exactly the ins and outs of what's going on at Harvard, so I can't really speak to it in depth. But I do know that you know professors have been punished for saying certain things that people didn't like.
Anybody ever punished at York College for that?
Not that I know of.
But you did say somewhere that you were criticized by your dean at one
Um,
point.
yes, but that happened a few years ago. I don't think it's a matter worth talking about. The true ostracization came from my field at large, and the leaders in the field of rhetorical studies. That's where the vitriol is really coming from.
So why did you found or co-find Free Black Thought, and what is it?
Um, Free Black Thought is a nonprofit focused on displaying viewpoint diversity within Black America. There's this idea that Black people, think alike. They agree on certain interpretations, they agree on certain goals, things like that. They share the same exact values, attitudes, and beliefs, and that is not true. So, Free Black Thought is out there to dispel that myth and provide a voice for Black writers and poets and artists who aren't represented in mainstream media. There's a journal of Free Black Thought, there's a compendium, a robust bibliography of voices you may not know of. And there's a new podcast that's been about 2 months old now, and it's going well.
Why did you start it? How did you start it?
Well, why I started it? I started it because of there was an incident in 2019 at a conference. I listened to a talk that I thought was a bit off, to put it lightly. The speaker was basically saying it was inherently racist to expect standardized English from Black students. And I went on a now defunct listserv and asked, is this really the best advice for professors and best representation for minority students? It was a long email, and the response to that was not very good. The response to that was that basically I wasn't a real, authentic Black person, and I had a colonized mind, and I wasn't as enlightened as everybody else about race relations in America and things like that. It got pretty vicious, spilled over to social media, and that motivated me to focus on the rhetorics of anti-racism and to fight race essentialism, and to co-found Free Black Thought. Um, it it wasn't my idea. I found people, or they found me, and told me what they were doing, and I said, you know what? Yeah, let me be a part of this. Let's see how it goes. And so far, so good.
Are you criticized by your colleagues there at York College or others for doing something like this?
Not to my face. I know for a fact that there are certain people out there who don't agree with me. And it's interesting when white people tell me I'm not being Black correctly. Um, that's always fun. But for the most part, I am pretty comfortable here.
What's your experience in white people telling you that you don't have the right, excuse the expression, rhetoric?
Hmm. I've been accused of white supremacy, because I value things like self-reliance, individualism. I value learning as many dialects as you can, especially the one that's most prominent in civic and professional spaces. Because of that, I am mired in quote unquote white ways of knowing, and therefore a danger to the Black community. And when white people tell me that, it's really, really disquieting, and infuriating, if I'm to be honest.
What do you say back to them? And do you say anything back to them to their face?
Well, it hasn't really happened to my face. It's happened on social media. I'm not entirely sure it would happen to my face anytime soon. But I remind people of the hypocrisy coming from a lot of contemporary anti-racist scholars, activists, what have you. They insist that we should believe Black voices, but not mine, right? They insist that we should embrace the lived experiences of Black people, but not mine. And so I point out that hypocrisy, and they typically have nothing to say.
You, I've seen a lot of your work, and I'm just going to throw phrases at you and have you define them and why you want to comment on them. One of them is systemic racism. What is systemic racism from your point of view?
Systemic racism is the idea that racism is, they say, baked in to American society and American institutions. And the idea is that these institutions are built with the oppression of minorities in mind, right? So certain policies are made so that white people maintain superiority, right? And every disparity in race relations is because of this systemic racism, right? Every problem is because of this systemic racism, and nothing else, right? And that's the idea.
How often do you see that actually happening, or do you?
Um, I don't typically see it actually happening, but that's the nature of it. If you ask people who believe in it, it's supposed to be hidden. It's insidious. It's something that you have to, look for. And if you don't see it, then you are suffering from false consciousness. you have a quote unquote colonized mind, and the people who are not mired in that kind of colonial mindset are the ones who really see it and should be the leaders. That's the idea.
What were your parents' attitudes about this, and what's their reaction to your success?
My parents, we didn't really talk about uh, politics, race relations, social political issues, what have you. It was really a fun place to be. We didn't have those kind of conversations at the dinner table. They didn't come up. These are things that I would discover as I went into college and went into graduate school and then into the academy. So I didn't grow up with this as a normal part of my household.
What about your siblings?
Neither did I.
What any feedback from them now that you're doing what you're doing?
No, not nothing negative. They know I have my reasons, I suppose. But again, it's something that I do, and it's talked about for a little bit, and then we move on. It's not really a big deal in my household. Thanksgiving is about Thanksgiving, not about these issues. Christmas is the same. It's not a it's not a big topic of conversation among us.
Another phrase on the list, and we hear this a lot, is white supremacy. What does that mean
Yes.
to you?
White supremacy is the act of maintaining supremacy by people of European ancestry. It is aligned with Enlightenment values like self-reliance, individualism, primacy of reason, equality before the law. All these things are derived from people who derive from Europe, aka white people, and therefore, because of that connection, they are already considered inherently racist. People go as far as to say that these things are actually worsening racism because they help hide it.
So, do you think there is such a thing as white supremacy?
No.
Why not? So many people do.
Um, I think that's interesting. I think a lot of people, especially people of African American or Latino minority um, scholars, students, what have you, the ones that are most adamant about white supremacy are the ones that tend to have the least interaction with white people. They tend to be people who grew up in predominantly Black or predominantly Latino areas and didn't really meet and interact with white people until later on in their lives. I grew up in a predominantly white area and went to a very diverse school with many white people as Black people, and it was I liked it. I was proud of it for that, right? So I have this different relationship than they do. So there's a lot of speculation going on, a lot of fear based on things they've heard and not experienced. And I've been experiencing this since kindergarten. So actually knowing the terrain makes you less fearful of the terrain. And I think that's what's going on. At a young age, I realized that white supremacy wasn't really, legitimate. I'd be sitting in class and I look to my left, and the white kid to my left is eating paste, and I say, "Okay, he's superior to me." This this is clearly a myth.
That must have
So
really happened.
yeah, um, a lot of things happen to make me realize that white supremacy isn't, you know, um, the boogeyman, the specter that a lot of people say it is.
Have you ever been treated differently, in your opinion, by white people?
Because yeah, definitely.
And how do you see it?
Well, it depends on the context. Sometimes people treat me, especially kindly because they feel like they need to, or they're cruel because they have ideas about my competence or my intelligence or something like that. I've had it from both sides.
How big a problem is this whole subject of race in the United States right now?
It's bigger than it has been in a while, because it is at the forefront of, it seems to be at the forefront of everything we're doing, especially from an institutional standpoint. A lot of places are, doing DEI trainings and things like that, and implicit bias trainings, especially after George Floyd, but even before that, with Trayvon Martin and other unfortunate situations, being seen, being heard, and the reactions to those things. It is definitely at the forefront of the American psyche right now. And, I understand that. I'm not saying that it shouldn't be that way, but I'm not a big fan of how it's being addressed typically.
What was your reaction when George Floyd was killed?
Oh, it's anger, that this person was killed unnecessarily, and we have footage to see that he was killed unnecessarily. And it the fact that it was a white cop and a black person obviously exacerbated a lot of emotions across the nation, across the world, actually. So I was in line with that. I was very angry about it, but it's interesting that we can agree on a problem, but disagree on the solutions, right? And that's the main source of contention in my life right now.
You mentioned, well, you didn't mention that you've written about Black Lives Matter. What do you think of that whole concept?
I love the term. I like to think I matter. But the organization has some flaws, as most people are starting to realize. Um, Forget about the financial issues they're in. They were coming from a particular ideology that I think is not conducive to improving race relations. And that ideology is based in Marxist thought, often called critical theory, or critical social theory. And it basically takes Marx, and instead of proletariat bourgeoisie, it's minority white people, and they project that onto society and move from there. So everything's based on that idea, and I think that is profoundly flawed. Excuse me.
Go back again to your upbringing and your schooling and all that. What other reasons do you think you don't think like, I don't even know if it's the majority of black people, but you don't think like a lot of the intellectuals that we hear in our society?
Well, we I don't think like a lot of intellectuals that are heard. You're right about that, which is why I co-founded Free Black Thought, to kind of combat that and give a voice to those other black scholars, black people in general. Um, a lot of black people feel like me. They don't speak up because it doesn't seem to be in their best interest. Excuse me. It doesn't seem to be in their best interest. They like their jobs. They like being a part of a community, whatever it is, and they don't want to rock the boat. But they understand the flaws in the logic of organizations like BLM.
DEI, you mentioned
Mhm.
diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Yes.
Where did that come from, and is it working?
Well, the terms, came from the civil rights movement, in the '60s, and those terms, diversity, various cultures working together, right? Equity, having giving the same opportunities to people, right? Having them open to people anyway, not making a concerted effort to block them from those opportunities, and inclusion, making sure people feel well included, like this is their home too, right? Those ideas are derived from the civil rights era. However, the definitions we have now are derived from a critical social justice mindset. And those terms have changed. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't know that they've changed. So when they see a black person against DEI, they're they're confused, right? They don't really understand what's happening here, and they think I'm some kind of despicable person. But the case really is that these terms don't mean what they used to mean. Diversity means, diversity of, bodies, but not viewpoint, right? And it typically means pushing the white aside because they've had their time, right? And now we're going to focus on minorities. Equity means equality of outcome rather than equality of opportunity. So instead of opening the door for everybody to go and get these resources, they're just saying, you know what, we're just going to make sure that you all have these same outcomes. And inclusion is basically tantamount to censorship. You can't say anything that will offend a minority of some sort. They're called microaggressions. So if you ask somebody where he or she is from, that is considered inherently racist, whether consciously or unconsciously. So these things are not quite what they used to be, and that makes all the difference because that turns into the redefinition of other terms, like racism, for example. That can only be a white person discriminating against a black person, regardless of the white person's socioeconomic status or the black person's socioeconomic status or the white person's ethos or the black person's ethos, just period. You know, um, this racism can only be done by white people. If I am discriminatory against people because of their white skin, that's just discrimination. That's just prejudice, right? Racism is something different. Most Americans don't know that, yet the DEI officials in their workplace, in their school, or something like that, are abiding by those definitions, which is why part of the reason why they're getting away with it.
You said something I want to follow up on because uh, as a white guy that's been asking people where they're from for the last 60 years in interviews, is that a tip off to people that I'm a racist?
To some people, yeah,
Why?
yes, it is. Because there is this idea that you're asking for racist reasons. Now, let me start with some of the tenets of critical social justice, which is an ideology that underlies much of um, the contemporary anti-racist activism and teaching. Critical social justice has the primary tenet that don't ask whether racism happened, ask how it manifested in this situation, which is to say it's always going on. If you think that might have been racist, it was racist, right? And anybody who tries to explain himself is just being defensive and trying to maintain white supremacy. Or if I try to explain myself, it's because I've been duped, and my mind's been colonized by white people, right? So that's the idea. So when you ask a question like, where are you from? The interpretation is, oh, you don't think I should be American? You think I'm from someplace else? Now, that does get annoying. If you're Asian and you're from Brooklyn and you've been there for 100 years, somebody said, hey, where you from? That's kind of annoying. Yes. And you can address it then by saying, I and other people of my race have been here for quite some time, by the way. It doesn't have to become a quote unquote microaggression. What's more, microaggressions also imply that people of a certain race all think the same. That's the race essentialism that Free Black Thought is trying to combat. So to say that asking where you're from is a microaggression implies that all Black people think it's a microaggression. So don't say it. I don't. So I won't react negatively to that statement. Maybe somebody will, sure. That doesn't mean that I will as well because we share a skin color, right? So there's that race essentialism again.
So this is a little bit off the topic of what we're talking about, but what's your reaction when you watch the media treatment of Clarence Thomas?
Ah, well, I think when Clarence Thomas comes up, it kind of gives a lot of people, including white people, a pass to say very racist things because, oh, well, it's Clarence Thomas. Black people hate him too. But again, that's race essentialism. Not all black people hate him. I don't hate the man. I don't agree with everything he does, for sure. I mean, that's for sure. But that has nothing to do with his race. When a white judge does something, we talk about that person's personality, thought process. When Clarence Thomas does something, we talk about his race. And I don't know why we can't just talk about what he said and not who he is. That is an inherently ad hominem fallacy being perpetrated by people who should know better, including people in rhetorical studies.
Why do they do that then? What's their motivation?
Well, it's their motivation is the narrative that derives from critical social justice, which is, the world is stacked against us. All right. White supremacy is the main point of everything. Right. So if this black person does something, we can say, well, this is not a real black person. Look, America, this is not a real black person. We're real black people. A real black person wouldn't say this. He wouldn't make these decisions. He wouldn't have these ideas. And if he does say certain things that we don't like, it's probably because he's trying to please white people. So it goes into the whole um, uh, victim oppressed or victim oppressor kind of narrative.
There's another professor in this country that's recently had a tremendous amount of success. I'm sure you know who Ibram X. Kendi is
Yes.
at Boston.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't seen the latest numbers, but he sold, I think, at least 2 million copies of How to Be an Anti-Racist.
Mm-hmm.
Give us some, tell us what that's all about, and why did he sell so many copies right after the George Floyd murder?
Well, the George Floyd murder was a kairotic moment for such books. This goes for Robert DiAngelo's work as well. What I mean by kairotic is it was the perfect window of opportunity. The time, the subject matter, the exigencies of police brutality, all those things aligned in a way that made people look at books like Kendi's as this, a solution or a guide to finding a solution. The book is mostly, well, it's substantially memoir, and it's substantially just a kind of riffing on what we need to do as a country to move forward productively and anti-racially or racistic. I don't even know how to render that term, but in an anti-racist manner, right? So unfortunately, there's not a lot of you know solid research and reasoning going on there. It's very, pardon the pun, black and white thinking. Either this or that. There's no nuance going on there. So Kendi's main thesis, part of his main thesis, is that every problem, every disparity that black people have is because of some racist policy, right? Which isn't the case if you pay attention. There are other factors going on, and it really depends on the particular black person or black family, black neighborhood, what have you. But that's simply, it's not that straightforward. There's a lot going into this. But he says that if you don't abide by this, you're basically saying those disparities are because black people are inferior. And so he has to, because that's such a bad conclusion, we have to go with this when it's not that cut and dry.
I've seen some mention of this, not necessarily from you, but the difference between an anti-racist and a non-racist.
Yes. And a non-racist is somebody who isn't being racist, but he or she is letting racism happen around. They're not really doing anything to get rid of it systemically. An anti-racist is somebody who, tries to get rid of it systemically through policies and things like that. They're actually pushing back. There's no neutrality in the situation, right? And I'm not 100% angry at Kendi for that kind of statement. It aligns with the concept that silence is consent, right? If something wrong is happening and you stay silent, you're basically saying it's okay. So it's extended from that kind of mindset. So I'm not 100% angry with him about that. But the the nature of anti-racism, and the idea that because there is a disparity or because there is a problem in a Black community, it has to be because of some kind of racist, systemically racist situation. I think that's short-sighted.
His book's called How to Be an Anti-Racist. Your book is called A Critique of Anti-Racism in Rhetoric and Composition.
Yes.
When you put your book out, did the media pay any attention to it?
It didn't seem like that. Didn't seem like right now.
Why not?
I don't think.
What's the difference between those two books?
What's the difference between the two books? One is more aligned. I don't know if Kendi would embrace critical social justice as his go-to ideology, but it's more aligned with the oppressor oppressed kind of situation. My book basically says that what's going on in my field, in the name of empowering students, is actually disempowering them. It's incentivizing negative emotionality, and negative outlook. It's incentivizing critical social justice as the lens through which we see the world. And that's not, to me, an accurate way of looking at the world. And that's what I write about.
Your students ever confront you in the classroom having opposite views from yours?
No, no. I
Why,
mean, they may bring something up, but there's no contention behind it.
do you get any sense of what professors across the higher education business are teaching when it comes to racism in most schools?
I'm not in every classroom. So I don't really know. As far as my field is concerned, the voices, the loudest voices are speaking about a kind of critical social justice pedagogy, um, based in the transformation of society. So, you don't just have a writing class, you have a writing for social justice class. You're not calling it that, but that's what it is, right? There are professors who will voice that their main goal in teaching is to transform society, even if they have to use their students to do so. And there's an inherent contradiction that they understand and embrace. That if you're educating students, you're educating them for happiness and success and fulfillment in this society, right? But if you're trying to transform the society, that goes against the mission of education. So they basically say things like, if I let this student learn or appreciate or think that standard English is the way he needs to go in a certain situation, then what I'm doing is perpetuating the status quo, right? And therefore, I need to combat that, right? So those are the issues I see in my field anyway. And from what I hear, is going on in other fields as well.
What do you say basically about the way the national media treats this issue? Are we getting a balance?
No, we're not getting a balance, especially from the fact that everybody who's considered against this contemporary social justice form of anti-racism is a right-wing conservative, uh, of European descent, and that is far from the truth. There are many people on the left of various colors who are also upset about this. Some of them are voicing it. Most of them are not because they want to maintain their jobs and they don't want to be ostracized. But that's if you listen to the media, is every Black person's for it, every white person's against it, and that is not the case.
Where does this come from?
That's a good question. It's I can keep saying it comes from critical social justice ideology and things like that, but it also comes from policies that were meant to level the playing field. And the problem is people interpret these policies differently. Let's talk about diversifying a workplace. Okay, so how do you do that? Well, you just make sure that the Black people are not discriminated against because they're Black and have access to resources that everybody else has, right? But that can be interpreted as, let's do a quota system, right? And let's do that quota system. Let's find people, who can lead this initiative, and the people with the loudest voices are the ones talking about, the fact that racism can only be done by white people and not by black people, and that microaggressions are a thing, and things like that. So it also comes from particular interpretations of policy, and to come to their defense, some of these policies are kind of ambiguous.
When did the microaggression term come into the discussion?
Daryl Tsu, if I'm not mistaken, in the '70s, coined the term. Don't quote me on that, but it became kind of mainstream, if you will, in the last 10 or 15 years, uh, mainly because of the kairotic moment of people seeing police brutality online through social media, through somebody's camera phone, or something like that. Um, and like other things, that had the opportunity to come in and really, really occupy people's minds, and become one of the talking points of contemporary anti-racist activists. Right, this concept of microaggressions. You you think that was a neutral statement, but it wasn't. And sometimes it isn't. But we also aren't psychic. We can't tell what's going on in somebody's head, and if you're not psychic, and you appreciate individuality, then microaggressions, that whole concept falls apart.
The, and I'm just going to say this. You can obviously disagree with it, but somebody like you, black person who sounds to some people like a conservative, and therefore
Mm-hmm.
attracting white conservatives and white conservative money. What's
Mm-hmm.
your reaction when you hear that and that connection with your website or whatever you're doing in your writing?
Um, it's interesting that people think I sound like a conservative for abiding by the classical liberal values that King wanted to embrace as a black person, Martin Luther King. The issue with civil rights and Martin Luther King's way of going about things was that the problem wasn't classical liberal values like individuality, freedom of speech, equality before the law. The problem was that black people weren't allowed to enjoy those things. So he wanted to give access of those things to black people. And that's something I think is a worthwhile goal. These days, um, anti-racism means you're demonizing classical liberal values like that. They're part of the problem. They're helping people hide white supremacy, and they do nothing to uplift black people. That's the idea. I disagree with that. So if liking individuality and free speech and the primacy of reason, and free markets and things like that makes me conservative, that's very strange, because there are white people who agree with that who aren't being called conservatives. They're still allowed to be liberals.
Why? I don't know if you still are, but you became associated with the Cato Institute.
Yes.
What's that connection? And that's a libertarian group.
Yes, it is. I'm a research fellow for the Cato Institute. And a lot of what I do aligns with libertarian values. Now, I have yet to slap that label on, but I embrace classical liberal values the way Cato tends to. I see it as something that should be the goal for every American citizen. I think that classical liberalism is social justice if you do it correctly, right? If you allow everybody to have, access to be equal before the law, if you allow people to exercise their right to free speech and free association, and things like that, it's allowing that for everybody. To me, that is social justice, and Cato aligns with that, and that's why I think it's a good fit.
What do you think of Barack Obama?
I like Barack Obama.
What did you think of his presidency?
I I think he was a Democratic president. I don't think he did anything incredibly awful. I don't think he did anything incredibly great. I do think I think people who call him a bad president are wrong. No president is perfect. But I was I was fine with his presidency.
What do you think of his rhetoric?
Well, I did co-edit a book with Matthew Abraham on the making of Barack Obama, and I contribute, along with co-writing the introduction, I contribute a chapter on his "A More Perfect Union" speech. So, what I pointed out in that speech was, well, Kairos. I mentioned that before. The window of opportunity, the perfect time and place to say something. When the Jeremiah Wright thing happened, when he denounced America in church, in a church that Obama attended, that was his opportunity to talk about the things he wanted to talk about regarding race. If he did it before that, he would have been harping on racism, quote unquote, right? He would have been, oh, here's the race card again. But once that happened, that gave him the opportunity to say, okay, I have to do this because of that, right? So that was a kairotic moment that he kind of waited for. I don't know if he was trying to wait for it, but that happened for him. And so I write about the importance of Kairos, finding a rhetorical window of opportunity and that speech. So I think he's rhetorically savvy in that sense, anyway.
What do you think of Al Sharpton and
Um,
his rhetoric?
well, I haven't listened to Al in a while. From what people have told me, he's a little less adamant than he was when I was growing up in the 80s and 90s. But he seemed like, and I don't know the person again. I'm not really a Sharpton scholar or anything like that. But he had a lot of fire behind him, and he was doing his best to be a leader for Black America. Now, sometimes what he called racist, I didn't think was racist. You know, I can't recall any situations right now, but I remember thinking, really, man? You know, but I don't know what he's doing lately. So,
Do you have children?
no.
If you did have children, what would you do with raising them compared to the way you were raised? Would there be any difference? And would you talk race with them?
Well, I would raise them similarly in that, an unconditional love. If I came home with a C, I wasn't, ostracized, right? Not that I came home with C's, mind you, but I could do that and not be shamed by my parents. I would do the same with my students. I would, my students. I don't have kids, so I have to say students. My hypothetical kids. I would talk about race, but I talk about it in a way that wasn't divisive, that didn't encourage them to hate or be suspicious of somebody because of his skin color, right? I wouldn't do that. I would let them know, about the history of this country, about the things that have gone on, and how that may or may not affect the present. Yeah, so I would talk to them about these things, but I wouldn't do it in the way that we're seeing in higher education and professional cultures, in politics, what have you.
What do you see in the rhetoric about police?
Um, the rhetoric about police is, understandable given the social truth behind police brutality. And what I mean by social truth is that there's this narrative about what's going on, and then there's what's going on. There's the numbers. The number of unarmed Black people killed by police is under 20, um, with the average under 20, not 20,000, under 20. Yet, if you ask the typical person, it's in the thousands, right? Now, it doesn't mean there's no problem, right? But the problem is kind of hyperbolic in a sense. So I'm not saying there aren't problems with between police and their communities, but if we don't look at things accurately, we can't solve them accurately.
How has rhetoric about race changed in your lifetime?
Uh, yeah, it has definitely changed. For example, you know, um, the idea of you've heard this term uppity Negro, right? That is somebody, a black person who dares to think he's equal to a white person. He speaks in certain ways. He has certain values. He does a certain job and things like that. And he was called uppity. If he has a command of standardized English, he was called uppity. Now, today, if somebody has a black person has a command of standardized English, white and black people are calling him, a white supremacist, literally. They're saying he has a colonized mind and things like that. So, when a white person calls somebody uppity now, other black people stand up and applaud. That's the difference between then and now. The basis of what we're doing has changed. It's gone from we should be included in America to down with America because it's inherently racist. And the rhetoric derives from that.
Can't let you go until I ask you about one of the more controversial subjects. You've talked around it, but not the exact phrase. Critical race theory and the
Mm-hmm.
teaching of critical race theory in schools. Is it being done from what you know, and what does it really mean?
Um, it's being done in praxis. So nobody's reading, Derek Bell or Kimberly Crenshaw or anyone like that. But their teachers have. And they incorporate that into their pedagogy. Now, I think using the term critical race theory is not 100% accurate. I say critical social justice because there are certain things about original critical race theory that make sense. Intersectionality is a thing. I'm not just a black person. I'm a black male, straight, you know, middle class. All these things intersect to make up who I am, and one would do well to consider those things if one can. So I understand that idea, but it's been demonized. Now it's turned into the person with the most downtrodden intersections, right? Is the person who's allowed to speak the most, the person with the most um, quote unquote privileged intersections needs to shut up and listen. And I think that's a bastardization of what critical race theory could be. Now, that doesn't mean it's perfect. There are aspects of it that I think are problematic, but there's enough of it. It's a nuanced enough thing that I don't like, attributing all this, vitriol and drama to that. I say critical social justice more accurately.
Did you
I think so.
read the New York Times article about the 1619 Project? And if you did, what was your reaction to it?
I did read it, and some of the essays were fine, and others were just not accurate. And they were abiding by social truth. What I mentioned before, the ideas that derive from a particular narrative about what's going on, and not what's really going on. Um, a lot of the historical facts were just wrong. They were flawed, and the people who published that knew it was wrong. They were told it was wrong by other historians, black and white, and they didn't listen. So initially, that was clear. I think they went back and cleaned some things up. But yeah, that is a document that, in a substantial way, abides by the narrative and not the facts.
So, what is Eric Smith's goal from here on out? What do you want to accomplish? And tell us how you can, if somebody's interested in free black thought, where do you find it?
Um, well, what I'm interested in, combating race essentialism. The idea that there is a certain authentic way of being black, for example. I don't believe that. I think there are 40 million black people, and there are 40 million different ways to be black. That's how I approach that idea. Um, I'm also about keeping critical social justice pedagogy from devolving my field in particular. I think a lot of professors, as I said before, are more geared towards transforming society and less towards educating our students to be happy and successful and have some agency in society, right? I also don't think everything is about racism. Group consciousness basically says, race consciousness basically says, every problem my group has is because of that other group, and I think that is egregious, an egregious interpretation of what's going on. So I do want to combat that. I also want to save my field. I said that earlier, but I'm working on a project with other scholars to have an alternative for rhetorical education, one that does focus on, the particular context of Western civilization, but America more specifically, as a pluralistic society of free speech, and a civil society where we can associate as we please. You cannot sell your ideas in the marketplace of ideas if you're not rhetorically savvy. So I want to get back to basics when it comes to rhetorical education. So I'm working on a project now to give people that opportunity, and to not be mired in critical social justice pedagogy and things like that.
So Free Black Thought, where can people go? And if they want to write something for it, how's that? How do you do that?
Yes, you can go to www.freeblackthought.com. We also have a Twitter presence. And there is a way to submit to the editors. It's a, FBT email, right? And the editors there, I stepped away from all that stuff because I'm too busy doing other things. The incredible job the editors are doing at Free Black Thought needs to be mentioned. I need to shout that out, that they're doing such a great job with this and staying on top of the essays. We get so many essays, so many people are like, oh, okay, well, the other people will never publish this because they feel like they'll get in trouble. This place will publish this. This is an outlet, so that's something I'm very proud of.
Erec Smith, professor of rhetoric at York College, Pennsylvania. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Booknotes Plus podcast. Please rate and review Booknotes Plus, and don't forget to follow so you never miss an episode. Questions or comments, we would love to hear from you. You can email us at podcasts@c-span.org.